Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Fluff and Crunch. We're trying out some format changes here for the coming year. So, out with the intro music and in with a different introduction that we'll probably tweak over time. Anyway, today's episode is about Traveller, the original science fiction role playing game published in 1977 and continuously published in some form or another, or multiple forms, for the last 46 years. We talk about its setting. We talk about the system a little bit, and we also talk about some of the stories that you can tell in Traveller. So if you have heard of this game where you can apparently die during character creation, you should watch this episode. We would really appreciate it if you would leave some comments, subscribe to the channel, of course. Check out the links in the show description to our podcast. And if you'd like to get involved in some extended discussions about the games we discuss, and maybe some different ones, join our Discord. All the links are below, and we look forward to talking with you. Thanks again. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Jeremy.
How are you today?
I'm good, thanks.
I know for a fact you did no gaming in the last couple of days because this is the same week recording.
Since Monday. No,
Yes.
I have not done any gaming since Monday.
Neither have I.
Because it was
Neither have I.
three days ago.
I got nothing to share. That's great. Which then enables us to get right to the task of our topic for today, which is a game spotlight and a bit of a world and system and setting spotlight also on the granddaddy of science fiction role-playing games that I think that basically everyone's heard of, but far fewer people have played.
I think if I asked, there's a D&D group at school now, which I can't do because I'm teaching. But I think if I asked them, I don't think, well, it's fair, most of them wouldn't have heard of anything other than D&D.
Right. Well, I think it's a generational thing.
Yeah. Well, I've never played it, but I have, obviously, because, I know things like this.
Yes. You haven't lived until you've died in character creation, which technically you can't do in the mainline version of Traveller. You can't do that anymore, but we'll come back to that.
Not proper Traveller then.
No. No, I
We'll
think
get to
that
that.
most people, I think it's an age thing, it's a generational thing. The older you are and the longer you've been gaming, the more likely you are to have at least heard of it.
Yeah.
But it definitely is, I think there's always been a persistent niche of people who dig Traveller. A little bit of a background on it. It was published in 1977 by Game Designers Workshop. Mark Miller is the primary writer, was and still is. Other folks have played a role in it, but by and large, that which is Traveller is Mark W. Miller's baby for the last 46 years. It's whether it was the first sci-fi role-playing game or not is a subject of some debate, but I think it's safe to say that it's the longest standing.
Yeah, because the other one that goes back that far, is it like Star Frontiers, the TSR one?
Oh no, Star Frontiers came out in like 82 or 80.
But my point was that doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anymore. But there's some people say, oh, well, Metamorphosis Alpha was whatever, who cares?
But that doesn't exist anymore either.
No.
So it's by far the longest running.
Yeah. And as a do you argue that is Gamma? Who cares? We're not going to talk about that. The darn thing has been around for 46 years, and it is still published. It is what I would call. I'll just say this, and then I'll shut up, and you can ask me your questions, and we can poke through it and look at some resources for it. I can tell you how it works. It leans heavily toward the idea of like real science, hard science. So it's not space opera like. I mean, let's face it. Star Wars is just like it's fantasy in space.
Yes.
And Star Trek ignores so much physics for the sake of the story. Traveller doesn't. Traveller is far more, and I think persistent in terms of all science fiction role playing games over the years. It is the most persistently wedded to, firmly grounded in real physics. And more real, like more plausible science, and there are limitations that it creates that creates story-wise that are accepted into the canon. So that's one of the things that makes it significantly different than your typical sci-fi RPG.
All right, I want to go on for that now. Otherwise, I'm going to forget. So if it's that close, how do you travel huge distances?
Okay, that's a terrific question, because you'd think the name of the game is Traveller. 2 L's. You're going to travel. You are. However, um, the interstellar travel is covered by the jump drive, and jump drives are rated between 1 and 6. And a jump drive, its rating is how many parsecs it can move the ship in 1 week. And there's this whole like background story as to why, like you drop into drive space or whatever they call it, hyperspace, something like that, and it because of this is the fantasy physics of it. You drop into
That's what I
this.
was curious about.
Yeah, you drop into the space, and no matter how efficient the drive is, you're in it for about a week. And if you really want to be crunchy, you can roll. It might take like some half a day less or half a day more, but you're in drive space for about a week. And depending how good your drive is, it will push you between 1 and 6 parsecs.
I
And
find it very strange at the point you've decided you're going to have which is exactly what Star Wars does. Star Wars, you jump into hyperspace and you go faster. But then why have the limitation of a week if you're already decided you're breaking the physics in this one way?
that's just whatever the reasoning was from the original writers. That's what they decided on to place. I don't know. I'm not going to conjecture as to why they said let's make it a week, but that's what they did. It makes measuring things really easy, but it does create a pretty significant downward limit on how far, how fast you can go.
Yeah.
So if you have the best ship, you're going to go 6 parsecs in a week. And a little while from now, I'll show a map of known space, and you'll suddenly do the math and you'll go, wait a minute, the fastest ship there is would take years to get from one side to the other side. And so here's the weird thing with Traveler. You will travel, but you will never travel the full breadth of everything. But the degree of detail that exists in the canon, in established products, and in what fans have created, the degree of detail is immense. It's 46 years of detail. And so you don't need to travel the full breadth of space. You need to be able to travel within an area, and you will travel within that area, and you'll experience all kinds of things. But I think sometimes when people think of like, they see these maps of like the Third Imperium, which we'll get to in a minute, they see they'll go to travelermap.com, which I'll show in a little bit, and they'll go, oh my gosh, there are thousands and thousands of star systems. I will never, as a character or as a GM, I will never touch even but the smallest percentage of them. That's true, but you'll still travel around. So, okay. Let's start at the basics.
So I was just thinking that because obviously I could think of systems where it has better physics than that then, because you do not have jump drives, which would be the expanse or eclipse phase. But in both cases, you are basically limited to the solar system because you do not have jump drives. So then they have to have like ancient technology with big gates that let you go somewhere else, and they have to break it that way. But that's reality, isn't it? If you want to go across, if you want to have a sci-fi game where you're traveling across huge distances, you have to kind of go, well, this is how we're going to do it.
Right. You've got to break the rules. You have to break the rules of physics somehow. It's the decisions that the designers have made and stuck to as as canon create a unique and an interesting, I think, like backdrop, like the technology and the limitations on how far and how fast you can go create story limitations, which I find interesting.
So what's the elevator pitch for the setting then? Because literally all I know about Traveler is it's set in the far future.
Yes, thousands of years.
I know something about character creation, which I will ask later. And I know it's quite hard site. That's the extent. So I know nothing really. I've heard of the Third Imperium. I know nothing beyond that about the setting. So what is the Third Imperium? What's going on?
There are multiple empires. The in a way, I wonder if Miller was inspired a bit by Dune, not with like spice and junk like that, but the idea that a feudal system of government, because of technological limitations, becomes a necessity and a norm because of interstellar distances and limitations on how fast and how far travel and information can move. And so these various empires, first, second, third, have existed, but the government of the Third Imperium, which is the default time frame in which most of the versions of Traveler have taken place. about 1,000 years into the Third Imperium. And there's an emperor, and there are dukes, and there are, you know, no, there's a nobility, and there's an interstellar navy, the Imperial Navy. But star systems are and what are called sectors, and then the subsectors that make up those. And I'll show the map in a little bit so you'll have a sense of what this is. They are not, they're like internally self-governing by and large, but the Imperium is this umbrella over the top. So like when you move out of a system, you move between systems within the Imperium, you interact more with potentially Imperial forces like the Imperial Navy, things like that, or the Imperial Scout Service, which goes out and scouts out new planets and such. But there is a incredibly broad diversity of types of governments and types of worlds and types of cultures and societies within the Imperium. And like I said, I think the Imperium is better understood as a confederacy, more like the UN, but slightly more functional, slightly less dysfunctional, in that it is the organization exists to govern the relations between, not so much within the individual members. And I'm sure there are some traveler grognards out there who'd argue me, you know, from one sector to another on that. But I think for people coming to this from the outside, not knowing anything about it, I think that's about that does it. Now you asked about like what do you do in this?
I didn't, but that was going to be my next question.
Oh, go ahead and ask.
All right, before I get to what do you do, are there alien species?
Yes.
You know, like in Star Trek and Star Wars.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, that's just because it's kind of yes, no. I don't need to know what they are. I was just curious if they.
Well, I wasn't going to tell you. No, Traveler is explicitly a human-centric universe. It's not the universe, but like where the story is human-centric. However, there are multiple other alien races that are playable, and there are some alien races that sit outside of, you probably wouldn't play them, but they can be part of it. And some of what I find interesting is that there are multiple, like there is a human species, but there are multiple human races, in that there are significantly different human cultures that are so separate from one another that they are effectively totally different peoples. So the idea of like, well, I'm playing human. Okay. Yeah. But are you Villani? Are you Soleimani? Are you, what the heck? There's another one that's like psionic, whatever. I forgot off the top of my head. But they, you have a lot of options in that. And I think, you know, one of the things that Traveler can do, like if you look at it at first glance, you're like, oh, it's just all human. It's just all these worlds are all part of the Imperium. Everything's the same. It's actually not. When you scrape beneath the surface, you find a great deal of diversity. I mean, in that you have lots of options for story ideas.
All right, so let's go back to the thing that I didn't ask, but you thought I had, but I was going to. What do the players do?
Okay, here's the dumb answer. Anything. That's a dumb answer. So you could play merchants. You could play space truckers like Alien. You could play mercenaries. You could play Imperial Marines or Navy, or you could be scouts who are exploring. You could be, first off, going back to 1977, it took a long time. It was like into the mid 80s before there was really this like mostly fully formed the idea of the Third Imperium and all these different worlds and some of the places and some of the names and things like that. It took several years. When Traveler was first published, there was a whiff of that. There was a hint of those things, but you know, it came out in 77. What's the high watermark in pop culture sci-fi at that point? It's Star Wars. And Star Trek is having a resurgence. And so it was billed, and actually a lot of early gamers saw it as like, well, if you want to have like, you know, laser swords, go for it. If you want to have like big starships where there's a like military like crew, go for it. It could be used for virtually any kind of story. And so any science fiction story backdrop that you want, it could fit. It could fit in Traveler, which is, I think, a strength. It also potentially could be a weakness if someone coming into it doesn't have a clear idea of what they want to do or what they want to grab onto from the canon, because they're kind of like, well, I can do everything, then I don't know what to do.
Is there like a meta story? Because a lot of things, there's a setting, but
Mm.
then they do have clear, like this story thing is kind of running through it, and this is what's meant to be. Or here's the big sequel, or stuff like that. So is
Sure.
there that?
There have been. The original version of Traveller, which is now referred to as Classic Traveller, that came out in '77 and that had a ton of little supplements. They called them little black books, the LBBs, these
Yeah.
little digest-sized books that were individual supplements and adventures of different sorts. In the mid '80s, I don't remember exactly the year, but they released Mega Traveller. And Mega Traveller was a refinement of the rules. It wasn't a change of the rules. It wasn't like, it was more like D&D 1E to 2E. It wasn't like 2E to 3rd edition. It was a refinement of the rules, but the system was basically the same. But it introduced this idea of the emperor has been assassinated and there is civil war.
Okay.
So Mega Traveller was the Civil War. Then a couple of years later, this was in the early '90s, what was called Traveller: The New Era was released, and that was one of the departures from the original rule set, like the actual core mechanic, which is based out of, it's 2d6, very simple system. Traveller: The New Era departed from that and moved to what was then the house system that Game Designers Workshop was using at the time. And Traveller: The New Era posits a 100 years after Mega Traveller, when at some point during the Civil War, what's called Virus, which was an AI virus, is released, and it spreads throughout the Imperium, and the thing is homicidal. These viruses are homicidal, and so there is this massive collapse. And Traveller: The New Era takes place in this backdrop of exploration and rebuilding. And that was probably one of the shortest lived versions of Traveller. Nowadays, Mongoose Publishing has a license, and they have their updated 2nd edition rules, which are basically a polished version of Classic Traveller. Like if you go buy Mongoose 2nd edition 2022 rules update, the most current version of the rule book, you are playing something that is very close to Traveller from 46 years ago, albeit with some refinements. Mark Miller has what's called Traveller 5, which I don't know of anybody who plays or really talks about online. It is still based in that same system with a massive amount of mechanical options and other things dumped on top of it that apparently make it a really complicated mess. So my focus for today, if I were going to play Traveller today, it'd be Mongoose's 2nd edition, which, like I said, is basically the original rule. So taking old things and incorporating them in mechanically is boneheaded easy.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I wanted to ask about. My next one is, before you get into, but now I'm just looking it up because that's not what I thought you would be talking about. It is based on Mongoose. So the question I was going to say, because obviously we start to about that. You kind of talked about story there, and you talked about setting a bit when you talk about system. But one of my things I do know about Traveller is the history, and therefore the actual system is marginally more complicated. D&D is very straightforward. D&D goes, all right, D&D starts more complicated because you got like the original D&D, and then they did AD&D, and then they did Basic its own thing, and then Basic disappears, and we go 2nd, 3rd, 3.5, 4, 5th. And Shadowrun again is straight. We have Shadowrun, we have 1st, and then we go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, easy. And it's and okay, the publisher has changed on that. The publisher changed for D&D. Traveller's way more complicated. Now you've already hit it there. You've got Traveller, and then you have this Mega Traveller, and then you have this New Era thing. But then I'm aware of this fact that at some point it's split, that we have Mongoose, and then you've got this other version. So I wasn't sure which version you were going to be talking about. I also wasn't sure. This is one of the things I always put off Traveller. Is like, what's the newest, best supported, the one that everyone talks about? We have Traveller, which one? So I thought actually that it had gone back from Mongoose to someone else, but you're saying that is not the case.
No, Mongoose is the most. It is the most deeply supported. The production quality, I'll just throw this out. The production quality on those books is outstanding. The books are beautiful. The books are well laid out. The art in them is good. They're well bound, yada, yada, yada. They're really good. And they feel a lot like Traveller from the 80s, but with some of the rougher points of those kinds of rules and that kind of presentation buffed off or polished over. One of the things that you find a lot in early 80s, mid 80s RPGs is the way that they're formatted and the way that they're laid out looks a lot like war game rules.
Yeah.
And they read a lot like war game rules. And so Mongoose reads and looks and feels like a current game, albeit, you know, system wise and canon, it feels very much like, in that respect, it feels very much like the original Traveller. So if you are interested in Traveller, go look at Mongoose, their version of it. That's the version to run. There is an open source called the Cepheus or Cephas, and I think it's Cepheus.
Because I keep hearing about this.
Yeah, Cepheus engine is classic Traveller. It is it's the OSR of Traveller. It's the original 1977 version of the rules is basically what it is. So you can find that online for free. But if you were interested in getting into the game, I would ignore everything but what Mongoose is putting out. So
it's confused that because you go into drive-through, you type in Traveller, and you get a whole bunch of Mark Miller stuff.
Yep.
And then there's a tiny little thing to Traveller, like an intro thing to it. Mm-hmm. And if you click on that and go on to Mongoose, so basically, if you already know that Mongoose is the main Traveller thing,
just go there.
It's easy to find. I found a bunch of stuff for it.
That's what
if you don't know that, you're going to accidentally, you're not going to know.
Yeah.
So that's confusing. Right. So we are talking about Traveller, Mongoose. So I've got I'm not buying it, but on here on drive-through, I have Traveller Core Rulebook Update 2022.
That's the one.
So just out of curiosity, what is the difference then between that and, I don't know, so actually you're saying this is pretty similar to the old Traveller. That can't be the case. This is a 45-year-old game. So there have to be things
the core
that
mechanic
polished.
Here's the core mechanic. The core mechanic is you meet or beat a difficulty. You meet or beat that difficulty by rolling 2d6 and adding modifiers. That's it. You get modifiers based on your skills and based on your attributes. There are 6 attributes. Those 6 attributes, I'm going to tell you right now, because I'm going to force you into character creation. Strength, dexterity, endurance, and then intellect, education, and social standing. Those are your 6 attributes.
Wow, they changed one from D&D then.
You determine those. Social standing is a traveler's place in society.
It's close enough to the charisma that
well, if your social standing eventually gets high enough, you could actually get a title. Anyway, at character creation, you determine those by rolling 2d6. Okay. If your stat is 9 or above, you start stacking dice modifiers.
Okay.
So when you roll, you're going to roll and if you're using a skill, skills are like 1 or 2 points. If you have 3 points in a skill, that's beastly. You have 4 points in a skill, you're like, that's 1 in a bajillion people. So you roll the 2d6, you add a skill, and then if you have a modifier for your attribute, you would use that, and you try to meet or beat a difficulty number, and usually that difficulty number is like 8 or 7, usually 8.
It was like Powered by the Apocalypse then.
A little bit. So here's the weird thing about Traveller. Traveller is actually at the table. If the GM has prepared, if the GM has prepared, Traveller at the table is actually quite simple.
Yeah.
Now, as GM, if you take a big old bite out of that apple of all that crunchy hard science stuff, there's a lot of math to crunch. Like when you want to figure out, okay, your ship comes out of jump space into the system, your X distance away from the planet you want to go to, but you need to refuel at the gas giant, your X distance from there, and your maneuver drive acceleration is this. Then you got to figure out how many hours is it going to, those kinds of things.
Why?
Some people really love that simulationist. It's like simulationist porn in a weird way. Like people really, they love that. Like
it's why people like designing people who do like Shadowrun, like building their character and spending all the things on all of the different guns and mods and there
are folks who really love that whole, and I don't mean economy as in money, although that's a piece of it. Like the economy of decisions that you have to work through. Like jump drives run off hydrogen. Okay. So you can either buy refined hydrogen at spaceports, or you can skim hydrogen off gas giants in systems that have gas giants. Now, if you have if you can refine the hydrogen on your ship, which takes up space, then that helps your jump drive. If you don't refine it, then you might have problems. Like you muck up your jump drive potentially over time if you use unrefined hydrogen you just skimmed off of a gas giant. And that's only if your ship has hydrogen scoops. So there are people who love sitting down with the book High Guard, which has detailed starship construction rules. The core book also has some rules as well. And building a ship and being like, well, my ship weighs 100 or 200 tons, which means I only have just so much space in it. And to make it be jump 2, it's going to cost this much and it's going to take up this much space. Well, crap, now I don't have enough. I want more fuel so I can go farther. Some people really, really love that. The Traveler groups of which I'm a part, and I'm more a spectator because I haven't played the game actively in years, on Facebook, like there are people who really love that stuff.
Tried to say nothing.
No, but you know what I mean. Some people, they really, really dig that, and they want to feel like they're dealing with something real. And Traveler will give you all of that. Now, obviously, you can hand wave it. There are pieces of it you can ignore. But if the idea of building a starship with all these options and limitations, and then love this, then being saddled with like the potential of, well, how do you pay for the starship? The starship is going to be millions of credits. Well, you're going to have to take out a mortgage for the starship. You're going to have to pay the damn thing, which then actually creates opportunities for adventure, because as you flit through space, you're taking cargoes from place to place and trying to sell stuff to fund things. Again, the setting offers just about anything in terms of stories. But like I said, the game can be very numbers heavy, can be very crunchy in terms of detail because of that very very solid simulation aside. But more of that, in my experience, takes place away from the table than actually at the table. Like if you're rolling skills and trying to fix things and trying to shoot people and stuff like that, it's actually pretty smooth. The rules are really simple in that respect. We need to get to the elephant in the room, though.
Oh, you mean my question here?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're going to ruin it because like the famous thing. Look, they're so famous that this was on a T-shirt.
Yeah, I know. I've seen it before.
The famous thing about Traveler and its character creation is you can die in character creation.
Here's a cool thing about Traveler. Okay, I think a really cool, and it was revolutionary at the time. Okay, lots of games nowadays have life paths, right?
Yes.
Right. Where you build your character and your character picks up skills and other traits and this, that, all that stuff, so that you as a player are fed with ideas to help you come up with your
I'm not sure it's that popular. I think the only place I've seen it is in 2D20 games. So we think it's a thing.
Well, Cyberpunk 2020 had a life path, and Red,
but I
mean, to a degree
does. A lot of games. I think life paths are a brilliant idea because in making your character, you already, before you even start playing, you feel like you know them a bit.
Yes.
You have a history.
Yeah.
You have an idea of things that's happened to them. And then from that, but you've got this idea of, rather than any system where you just pick, when you just like, oh, I'm going to pick this thing, and I'm going to pick this thing, and I'm going to pick this thing, and these are my stats, blah, blah, blah. And you're just picking some stuff, but, options. And then it's just a bunch of things on a sheet. A life path, like almost births a character. So you have that extra little connection. And it's such a clever way. And I do feel it's a bit of a shame that some of the Modiphius, some of the 2D20 games have moved a bit away from that. Like they kind of have life paths, but they're not really. Though,
like Achtung Cthulhu offers it because you have clear steps that you go through, that you add more pieces to the character. And so it enables you, I think, to build a backstory. And like you said, it does birth a character. Well, Traveler is, I believe, the first game to have anything like this. And the way Traveler works, and this is just in a general sense, is your character starts at age 18, and that's when you're stepping out into the world. And what you do is you serve a series of 4-year terms. And I don't know I mean, I guess leave it to a GM as to how literal that is. But the default is that you serve a series of 4-year terms, and you could do all kinds of things. Like you could decide, I'm going to enlist in the Army. So you go in the Army, or I'm going to go in the Navy. You go in the Navy. I'm going to go be a merchant, or I'm going to go to university, or I'm going to be a criminal, or whatever. So you have an origin world. Like, what kind of world are you from? You pick up some skills based on your early life. And then when you want to say, like, I'm going to be a Marine, I'm going to be a Space Marine, you have to roll using your stats to get into that. Like, you have to be accepted into it. And Mongoose has done a nice job of making the process so that it makes sense. Like, if you don't get in, you can get into something else. And if you keep rolling really, really poorly, then maybe you end up as, like, you know, like a roustabout or a criminal or something like that. You end up with some like crappy job. Once you're in a term, there are like when you let's say you go in the Marines. You're 18 years old, you go in the Space Marines. You pick up a package of skills that represents the basic training of that service. And then you make a couple of rolls that give you as a player some idea as to what was the nature of that 4-year block of service. And it was possible in the earlier versions of the game, you could die. And then you just start over again. You're dead. Mongoose Second Edition now has you can be like injured and then you're mustered out, you know, and you now have like a peg leg or you have like an injury that you have to lingers or something, whatever. You could just treat that as death. But the neat thing about this multi-term, like when you get to the end of a term of service, you could either say, okay, I'm done. My character's done. I'm 22 years old. I know a couple of things, not very well. I'm ready to start adventuring. Or you could say, I want to stay in the Army or Space Marines. We'll stick with that. So then your next term, you pick up a different package of skills and you can get promoted. You could get sent on special duty. Like there are, each of the career areas has a 2-page spread in the book of all these different like promotion and assignment options. You could win, you could be decorated. There's all kinds of like ups and downs that shape your career. And you could say, oh, okay, I'm 26 now. I'm going to stay on for a 3rd term. And you roll and you don't roll, you're not able to re-enlist. For whatever reason, like you fail your re-enlistment roll. So you're like, well, crap, what am I going to go do? So you go maybe do something else for 4 years. Your character ages, and there is a point at which your stats start to drop off because you get old, because that happens. And at some point, you as a player decide, I'm done with this character creation process of stacking up terms, and now I'm going to start adventuring. So you have a fully formed character with a background, with indications of experiences, and then skills and some money potentially. And maybe like it also, it gives you an opportunity to pick up equipment. Maybe you have part ownership in a ship, all kinds of things. So that by the time you start your adventuring career, like at the table with your friends, your character could be as experienced or detailed as you'd like it to be, or as inexperienced, which is kind of neat. It's kind of neat.
I like life path things.
Yeah.
Although I will point out that in Infinity's life path, you can die. Because it's transhuman, you come back.
Yeah, you just come back as like a...
That's what happened to Brian in his character creation. His character died in character creation, which was pretty cool.
In the older versions of Traveller and in Mongoose First Edition, they had like splat books for each career area. Like you could buy a book called like for the Navy, and the Navy book would have all kinds of additional details and options for what could go on during your terms. But I mean, honestly, and this goes back to, I think, the simulationist vibe of it, that it really does give you a sense as you're rolling through this of like your character comes to life, like kind of forms like, oh, I spent 8 years, 2 terms in the Navy, and then I got out and I became a merchant. You know, like, oh, well, I got out and I took my skills as a ship crew and I decided to sign on with a merchant crew. And, you know, then you do that for 4 years or 8 years or whatever. And now you have something of a story. The neat thing too is that I recommend this, you do character creation as a session. You work through it with everyone else. As you start to roll these different experiences, this setback or this award or whatever, you start to develop a why are we together?
Yeah.
Also, Mongoose has a second edition incorporated, added this nice feature where you choose a set of skills, like a skill package that is like topically coherent, that you then apply to all the members of the group to fill in gaps. Like you could say, okay, our campaign is going to be more of a mercenary campaign or an explorer campaign or a law enforcement or whatever. And there's a package of skills that then is applied to everybody so that you fill in gaps, and then it kind of knits mechanically the party together after everyone has done their individual character creation.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I just like life path systems. So I think the fact that they came up with it that long time ago is impressive. All right, so that kind of covers. So I guess the other main thing we often talk about is combat. How was combat like?
Combat, you notice that, I mean, well, you haven't seen a character sheet or anything like that. There are not hit points. Okay. Yeah. Your damage comes out of your physical stats. Your physical stats being, as a reminder again, strength, dex, and endurance. And so those attrit as you take damage. I mean, armor obviously has an effect, but combat can be deadly if you're not smart. If you decide if you want to play Traveler like your typical stupid contemporary action movie where the protagonist comes out from behind cover with a pistol in each hand and strides all badass like across open terrain firing, like, you're going to get dead. It is definitely not a superhero game. Your characters are not superheroes. Your characters they are skilled and experienced regular people. They are not superheroes. And so, yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. If you're expecting like running up the walls, wire fu, Jedi stuff, unless you were to add that as house rules, it's more like Alien or Aliens or Outland, which, by the way, Traveler fans will often say the movie Outland, the one with Sean Connery from the 80s, is about the most Traveler movie ever made. If you want to watch a movie that captures so much of just like the vibe of, and I think The Expanse also, I mean, even though it primarily takes place within our solar system, I think The Expanse has a very Traveler vibe to it because it sticks with, as much as possible, like hard science. Like accelerating really quickly in space can be a problem for you.
All right, cool. So I think my next question then, it's really too simple. Why do you think it's lasted this long? We say like D&D has lasted as long as it has because it's the thing. It's the first thing. It's always going to be popular. Because I can't, Traveler, the fact that it's been around that long, I can't think of many other things that have been around that long. Because even if we talk about World of Darkness, that was the early 90s that came out. Shadowrun maybe was the late 80s, and that's still around. But they're not. They've got like this. Traveler's got 10 years on them.
Yeah.
And I can't give any other games like some of the things you mentioned, like Gamma World and Metamorphosis Alpha North. Those have all got. Occasionally they come back.
Yeah, their moment.
Grabs the license and re-release them, and then they go again. Traveler is still going, kind of.
I think the simulationist side to it it appeals to a certain kind of gamer. It appeals to a certain kind of person. And so long as those people exist and are interested in playing games, this game will resonate with them. I think that's a big piece of it. And also the fact that the canon is absolutely huge. And to that end, I will share my screen. Those of you who are watching or listening by podcast, I apologize. There's a link to travelermap.com. That's Traveler with 2 L's again, travelermap, one word, .com. And let me share my screen so that you can all see, those of you who are watching, you can see just how huge the canon for this is. And this is just my example. So you're looking at the Traveler map. Zoom out. There's the extent. This red blob is the extent of known space within what's pumped out by Mongoose and has been pumped out over the years. I will let me pan out, and that's the galaxy. Oh,
Mhm.
and there's the Zodani. The Zodani are the psionic humans. That was the one human race that I forgot. So there's the Milky Way, and that little blob, the little red blob, is that which is the attention of all these books and whatnot are put on. Now, if you look in here, you see the Imperium. That is the third Imperium, and it's this area here. It's this area. It's this red area. Okay. Each of these rectangles is what's called a sector. Within each sector, there are 16 subsectors. Every single dot on this map is a world, or rather a system. I'm not going to delve into all the details of what this means. This is a absolutely ridiculous, insane, wonderful resource, the Traveler Map. But if you click on any of these systems, you get information from the Traveler Wiki about that world. And you can map jump routes. That's what these green things are. You can map jump routes. You can, like, again, if you want to get into just so deep into the simulation and feel like there's this world out there that you're working through, Traveler offers that. And there are people who, they really dig that. They really dig that a lot. And for whatever reason, it speaks to them. Yeah, and I think that answers your question. And again, the canon is absolutely huge. There's stuff written that you can find online, and there have been books published about virtually all the major areas, not all these individual worlds, but every single tiny dot on here is a system with information. And all this stuff right here, you're looking at like starport and size of the world and atmosphere and law level and tech level. All of this stuff is defined in the rule books. And so you can look at one of those things and say, oh, this world has a law level, whatever. You can't carry firearms there. You're going to get arrested. And the government looks like this, and its economy looks like that. So the GM and players have just this ridiculous amount of information to apply to writing their own stories. And I think that sense of realism, again, I think it really resonates with some people. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, that sounds kind of cool, just go scroll through travelermap.com and be shocked and amazed at all the information that is there. And if you're thinking, oh, wow, that'd be really cool, like we could, run all kinds of adventures in this, maybe you should check it out.
I can't think of any. Well, that's all my questions pretty much. The question we often ask the other is, do you think it's a good sci-fi game? But obviously you do, so I don't really think that's a...
Yeah, I do. It is a good sci-fi game if you want to play hard science fiction. If you want to play space opera or science fiction that doesn't dig very deeply into gravity wells, Star Trek just ignores that completely.
Yeah.
If that interests you, if you like that as a feature that creates opportunities and limitations, if that makes your storytelling, heart go a titter, then Traveler is beckoning to you, I think.
There was something else I was just going to ask, and I've completely forgotten what it was. Oh yeah, if so, because actually I think you did this in the last year. You at one point said you were going to 2D20 version of Traveler. So if you were going to play Traveler, would you use 2D20 or would you still use the Traveler system?
Okay. And I've thought about this a bunch. I've overthought about this a ton. If I were going to, yeah, well, why not? If I were going to use 2D20 for Traveler, I would, I would want to run it as more of like an action campaign. And that's why I would use it. I'm still thinking about that. It's always me. I start a campaign, I invest in it, and then part of my mind starts thinking about what's next, and I've already thought about how could I take bits and pieces, so I don't have to write the stuff myself. How can I take bits and pieces of Infinity and apply them to the canon is just amazing. The backdrop, Travel to the New Era was not it didn't last for a long time, but I kind of dig that. I like the backdrop of this massive virus has just like wiped out billions and billions of people and like shattered the interstellar community. And now there are some people who are trying to build back. I think one of the coolest things about the new era world is that there are these things called the vampire fleets. They're fleets of ships that are just run by these AIs that go around and do who knows. Like some of them are like weird, benevolent, like they want to be like benevolent protectors of organic races. Sometimes they just want to wipe them out. They're genocidal. There's not just one AI. So the idea of like these fleets of ships that are just run by robots cruising around space on their own weird agendas I find that interesting. But yeah, if I were gonna run it as a more of a high action, I would use 2D20. If I was going to run it more as like a classic Traveler kind of thing, I would just use the system as is. And if you look over it, you will recognize a simpler system that feels older, in that there aren't so much like there aren't like action points or things like that. Mongoose has added some features to the rule system that feel a little more contemporary. Like there are degrees of success depending on how you roll. And there are some other ways that you can, like when you're trying to do something that takes a long time, you can opt to take longer to get a bonus, or you can try to speed up you're trying to like repair the jump drive. If you take time, you're going to get bonuses on the roll. If you try to speed it up, it's going to be harder. So those kinds of things, like the degrees of difficulty and success, there's some of that I think is really like, that's contemporary. That's not something that you found in older games. And it definitely wasn't in classic Traveler from decades ago. That's in the game now. So I think it kind of sits between, it's not fully a contemporary game that is heavily favored toward the players and like super badassery on for the players, but it doesn't feel like, some people really get into like, we're playing basic D&D, you're a thief and you have 2 hit points. It's not that far in that direction.
Yeah, well, cool. I think you did a good job of explaining Traveler.
Yeah, and I'll end with this. I would go check out the Cepheus engine. I'll find a link to it. Because you can work through the character creation. And I think if you work through the character creation, you'll get a sense of like, oh, what could I do with this? What is this kind of life path like? That's pretty cool. And I'll find a link or two to a good place that you can get a sense of the canon is just huge. And what is it? I'll find a link and I'll put it in the notes. Thank you so much for listening. You can visit our show's homepage at anchor.fm/fluffncrunch. That's FLUFFNCRUNCH. We would really appreciate feedback and reviews on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to this on. Thanks so much.